Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's start our Tuesday class with the prayers. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhurbhavasva, Tatsavitra Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Diyo Yo Naha Prachodaya, Asto Ma Satgamya, Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya, Mrityurma Amritam Gamya. Om Sena Bhunaktu, Saviryam Karvavai, Tejasvi Navadhitamastu, Ma Vidvishavahi. Om Shanti 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 Om. Let's open our Uddhava Gita books. And we are on chapter 7, where there's a story about a Hans avatar answering the questions of sons of Brahma. So let's start with verse number 25, page number 224. Guneshva avishte cheto gunash chetase cha pragya jivasya de ubhyam gunasha cheto mad atmanaha. My dear sons, the mind has the propensity to enter into material sense objects, and material sense objects enter into the mind. And we are all familiar with this, right? However, both the mind and the material sense objects are designations that cover the pure spirit soul, who is my eternal part and parcel. So Atma is part of Paramatma, but it just gets covered up with these material objects and thinking about the material objects. So the sons of Brahma thought, my dear Lord, if we are unintelligent, you definitely stated that everything is a manifestation of you alone, because everything is the expansion of your potency. It thus appears that there is an intimate relationship between the mind and the objects of the senses. We simply want to ascertain how the mind can be detached from the objects of the senses. Please be merciful and enlighten us. The Lord replied, my dear sons, what you say is very true. Although the living entities are my eternal parts and parcels, in conditioned life, they artificially identify with the mind and thus become attracted to enjoy the objects of the senses. As long as the soul identifies with the mind, desires for sense gratification will continue to harass him. But because the mind and sense objects actually have no connection with the soul, they should be rejected. In this way, one can become free from the dualities of material existence. So the conditioned living entities in the material world are under the control of the three modes of material nature. Whereas the Supreme Personality of Godhead, being eternally liberated, is transcendental to the three modes of material nature. So in other words, the Sattvikata, Rajsikta, Tamsikta, they don't affect the soul. Only the Prakriti. Material sense objects enter into the minds of the conditioned living entities, and their minds run after the material sense objects. So verse number 26, further explanation. Guneshu cha avishach chitam abhikshanam guna sevya gunascha chit prabhavamad roop ubhyam tyajet. One who has thus attained me, understanding that he is not different from me, realizes that the material mind is absorbed within the sense objects because of constant sense gratification. And and that the material objects are present within the material mind. Having understood my transcendental nature, he gives up both the material mind and its objects. So we got to, this is what the sadhana is, identification with the real and let go of the unreal. It is very difficult to restrain the mind from the object of the senses because of the mind's false ego. Becoming detached from the mind does not mean that one stops thinking, but instead means that the one must purify the mind of its material propensities by engaging it in the devotional service of the Lord. It is practically seen that the objects of the senses enter the mind at every moment, as if flowing in a continuous stream. Considering this, how is it possible to detach the mind from thoughts of sense gratification? Such an endeavor appears to be an attempt to deny the mind's very existence. What is required is to engage the objects of the senses in the proper way for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this way, there will be no harm of sense objects entering the mind because the intelligence will dictate that they all be used in devotional service and not for personal enjoyment. There is no question of artificial renunciation, which can serve no useful purpose. So that means we don't have to run away from the senses or sense objects. Without engagement in the devotional service of the Lord, mere renunciation is of no lasting value. While residing in this material world, one engages in the service of the three, and the super soul are both fully transcendental to the three modes of material nature. Verse number 27. Jagrat swapnaha sushuptam cha gunato buddhi vritya tasam vilakshanaho jivaha sakshitve na vinishchita. The three functions of intelligence: wakefulness, dreaming, and deep sleep are caused by the three modes of material nature. It has been ascertained that the spirit soul is the seer and is completely aloof from these three states. Actually, the pure spirit soul has no relationship with material sense objects or the materially contaminated mind. So giving up the materially contaminated mind and the material sense objects means to give up a misconception. The state of awakening is born from the mode of goodness, the state of dreaming is born from the mode of passion, and the state of deep sleep is born from the mode of ignorance. However, the pure living entity is beyond these three states of being, which are functions of the intelligence. The living entity is actually aloof from them as a witness. So that's why we say that Jagrat Avastha, Swapan Avastha, Sushupti Avastha, they are all just states of the lower mind. Okay? So the three states of the living entity, wakefulness, dreaming, and deep sleep, which are functions of the intelligence, are born from the material modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance, respectively. The liberated living entity is actually aloof from these three states and is not under the control of the three modes of material nature. He is simply a witness. That's why it's called a seer, Sakshi. Verse number 28. Yahir sansritihi bandhoyam atmano gunvritida mai turye sthito jayat tyagas tad gun chet sam. Due to being bound by material intelligence, a conditioned living entity is dragged towards material sense of enjoyment. I am the fourth stage of consciousness, beyond wakefulness, dreaming, and deep sleep. And so you should become established in me and thus give up the bondage to material nature. In this way, you can automatically become detached from the material sense objects and the mind. Here, Lord Krishna answers the questions that the sages had placed. And we know who those sages are. Those are the sons of Brahma. Before Lord Brahma. In his constitutional position, the spirit soul has nothing to do with the objects of the senses and the three modes of material nature. It is due to the conditioned soul's false identification with the material body that the modes of nature engage him in illusory activities. When this false identification is given up, the soul is freed from the illusory engagements forced upon him by the modes of nature. The conditioned souls cannot free themselves from material bondage simply by their own endeavors. They must surrender to the Supreme Personality of a Godhead and depend upon His mercy. So that's why this surrender is so important. With our own effort, we cannot do it. Because who's making the effort? The ego is making the effort. So surrender. Being enticed by the material sense objects, one falls into the bondage of material existence. In his constitutional position, the spirit soul is transcendental to the three modes of material nature. And when he separates himself from the influence of these modes by becoming devoted to the Supreme Lord, he can be freed from all desires for material enjoyments. Verse number 29. Ahankara kritam bandham atmano artham viprayam vidvan nirvidya sansara chintam turye sthitas tyajet. The living entity has been placed in bondage by the false ego. So sometimes we wonder, how did we get in here? Because of the ego. Wrong identification of ourselves, which awards him the opposite of what he had actually hoped for. Therefore, an intelligent person should give up his constant anxiety to enjoy material life and remain situated in the Supreme Lord, who exists beyond the functions of material consciousness. Okay? So we think we can get happiness in this material world. That's a wrong place to look for eternal happiness. And we often talk about in other classes about this too. A living entity's material bondage continues as long as he remains in the bodily conception of life. An intelligent person should understand this fact very carefully and then become detached from material existence, which creates many unwanted conditions and which covers his constitutional nature of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. That is Sat Chit Ananda. One who transfers his attention from the objects of the senses to the Lord will no longer have to fear material existence. Because there's never a change in Lord, in God. Change is the one which we don't like. And change is always there in the Prakriti. Always. That is the nature of the Prakriti, to change. So the living entity becomes misguided from his real self-interest due to false ego. Okay? This is the cause of material entanglement. So that means we forgot ourselves, who we are. Falsely, we just identify with the non-self, then we get entangled. One who takes shelter of the transcendental personality of Godhead will gradually lose interest in material life so that he will remain steady on the transcendental platform. Sometimes we wonder, how do we really know whether we are progressing or not? Answer is right here. Gradually lose interest in material life. Okay? So you don't see the charm, you don't see the peace and the bliss in this material life. Because the real bliss and the charm is only in the God. So one who takes a shelter of the transcendental personality of Godhead will gradually lose interest in material lives. Gradually, you remember Lord Krishna also said, Shanai Shanai. Gradually. Sometimes we just want the transformation right away. No, we got to just keep on doing our sadhana. And gradually there's a change. So that he will remain steady on the transcendental platform. Being thus situated, one will take pleasure in cultivating Krishna consciousness because the taste for material enjoyment has slackened due to an awakening of detachment within the heart. So this detachment is in our inner part of the personality, not in the outside, inside. Devotional service to the Lord is the platform of transcendence. Verse number 30. यावन नानार्थ धी पुंसो न निर्वतेत युक्ति भी जागृते अपि स्वप्न अज्ञानः स्वप्ने जागरणम यथा. As instructed by me, one should fix the mind on me without deviation. If one continues to have various objectives in life, instead of seeing how everything can be dovetailed in my devotional service, then although believing oneself to be awake, one is actually dreaming due to lack of absorption on the transcendental platform. Just as one may dream that one has awakened while still sleeping. Until one has practically become detached from fruitive activities by engagement in devotional service, his life of sense gratification will continue. So that means we should not fool ourselves. We got to take it seriously. Although he may accept some path of liberation and thus consider himself to be saved, he will remain in material existence. Such a person is certainly an illusion and is compared to one who dreams that he has awakened, although he is still sleeping. Those whose minds are absorbed in something other than the Supreme Lord, who is one without a second, will remain bound to material desires for sense gratification. Although such a person may have understanding of his conditioned state of existence and the means for attaining liberation, and thus proudly advertise himself as a liberated soul, he will remain attached on the material platform. While sleeping, one may dream that he has awakened, although this is not a fact. Similarly, one may understand the distinction between the body and the soul, and thus think that he had become liberated, while continuing to display all the symptoms of one who is absorbed in materialistic life. Verse number 31. Satvad atmano ne sham bhavanam tat krita vida gatyo hetuvash chasya mrisha swapan drisho yatha. Any condition of life that is thought to be separate from the Supreme Personality of Godhead has no real existence, like something experienced in a dream. Just as a dreaming person sees himself engaged in many different activities, the conditioned soul imagines that he performs fruitive activities. Although the Hans Avatar has condemned the conception of duality within the material life, the Vedas have prescribed Varna Ashram Dharma, which divides human society according to occupational duties and spiritual statuses. How can these two things be reconciled? The answer is given in this verse. The words Anesham Bhavana refer not to the Vedic understanding but to conception of life concocted due to false identification with the material body and mind. Of course, the divisions of Varna Ashram system are also based on this illusion, but they are arranged in such a way as to gradually bring one to the point of enlightenment and spiritual understanding. So that means living a life according to the stage of life we are in. Being the Lord's creation, this material world is not false, as imagined by some less intelligent philosophers. This world is real, and the living entities are real, but the identification of the living entities with this material world is false. The example is sometimes given of a rabbit with horns. Rabbits are real, and the horns are real. But the sight of a rabbit with the horns in a dream is illusion. Similarly, it is a kind of a dream of the conditioned soul that he has a permanent relationship with this material world. So an object that was seen in a dream does not influence a person when he is awake. Similarly, when the living entity is liberated from material bondage, he no longer feels obliged to follow the principles of Varna Ashram, which are born from attachment to the body, nor is he attracted to enjoying heavenly pleasure, which can be obtained by performing the fruitive rituals mentioned in the Vedas. Verse number 32. Yo jagre bahir anukshan धर्मिनो अर्थान भुंगते समस्त करनैर हृदय तत् सदक्षान स्वप्ने सुषुप्तः उपसंहरे तप्त स एकः समृत्ये अनवयात त्रिगुण वृत्ति दृग इंद्रियेशः. While awake, the conditioned souls try to enjoy the fleeting experiences of this material world. While dreaming, he enjoys other illusory experiences within the mind. And in deep sleep, all such experiences are forgotten. By understanding these three states of wakefulness, dreaming, and deep sleep, the conditioned soul can realize that he is simply the witness and therefore transcendental. So, in other words, we got to always keep an eye on it, that we are different than these states of experiences. So we are just watching. That's who we are. One may first consider the three phases of consciousness mentioned above, then understand one's transcendental position as a spirit soul. One experiences childhood, boyhood, adolescence, adulthood, middle age, and old age. And throughout these phases, one is experiencing things while awake and while dreaming. The living entity is the same person throughout all such changes. He is the silent spectacle of the three stages of consciousness. One may argue that it is actually the senses that experience during wakefulness and that it is the mind that experiences during dreams. However, the Lord here states in the Riyesha, the living entity is actually the Lord of the senses. and mind. Although temporarily he has become a victim of their influence. By Krishna consciousness, one may resume one's rightful position as the master of the mind and senses. So the living entity experiences three stages of experience in the material world: wakefulness, dreaming, and deep sleep. While awake, the senses of the gross body are active under the influence of time. While dreaming, although the living entity is untouched by the objects of the senses, he remains affected by them on the mental platform. That's why we say that mind is watching the mind during dream. Because mind is the one which is creating the dream, and the mind is the one which is watching its own drama. In the state of deep sleep, the living entity forgets himself and the world. So that's why in the deep sleep, it's called a tamsikta, because you are untouched by anything. So deep sleep is not like a samadhi avastha, turiya. It's called tamsikta because it's just like nothing is really happening. And if we feel restful because nothing is happening. Body is resting, mind is resting, and we feel restful. Okay, but it's a tamasic state. Verse number 33. एवं विमृश्य गुणतो मनसस्त्रे अवस्था मन माया मयि कृता इति निश्चितार्था संचिध्या हार्दम अनुमान सद उक्ति तीक्ष्णः ज्ञान आसिनः भजत माखिल संशयादिम. My dear sons, after carefully deliberating upon how these three mental states are born from the three modes of material nature, and thus created by my illusory energy, you should cut to pieces the false ego, which is the source of all doubts, with the sharpened sword of knowledge, acquired by logical reflection upon the instructions of the sages and Vedic literatures. So that's why Swadhyaya is important. Study, reflect, and then experience. You should then worship me, who am situated within the heart. So the three stages of mind and intelligence are produced from the three modes of material nature, which are creations of the Lord's illusory energy and thus have nothing to do with the spirit soul. By the help of the sharp sword of knowledge, acquired by logical analysis of the instructions of saintly persons and the Shastra, one should destroy all doubts and worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead with determination. If one has attained spiritual knowledge and is no longer influenced by the three stages of wakefulness, dreaming, and deep sleep, he vanquishes the spirit of sense enjoyment that had been directed by his materially conditioned mind, intelligence, and false ego, and engages in the devotional service of the Lord so that all his doubts will be removed. So it's like we are facing towards the material nature. We have to turn around, face towards God. Material nature will stay there. Maya is still there. But what are we interested in? That's all it matters. Okay? You can never end the Maya. This is there. But what is important to us? Interest in the material nature or interest in who created the material nature. Maya or Maya Adhyaksha. If you're interested in the material nature, then we become Maya Adhin. We are like under the claws or the grips of the Maya. And that's where all the problems are. Okay. Let's look at a few more verses. Verse number 34. Ikshet vibramam idam manaso vilansam drishtam vinashtam atilokam alat chakram vigyanam ekam urudhev vibhati maya swapnastridha gun visarga krito vikalpaha. One should see that the objects of this world are an illusion appearing within the mind. Because material objects are temporarily manifested, they can be compared to the streaking red line created by whirling a blazing stick on fire. The spirit soul by nature exists in the single state of pure consciousness. However, in this world, the soul appears in many different forms and stages of existence. The modes of nature divide the soul's consciousness into wakefulness, dreaming, and deep sleep. All such varieties of perception, however, are actually Maya and exist only like a dream. So it's not the soul is changing over here. It's only the Prakriti which is changing. So that's why sometimes people get confused here, because consciousness word is used for the Atma also. And we say that, oh, these are the states of consciousness. So in this language, we should not get confused. Okay. After realizing that the spirit soul is distinct from the three stages of consciousness, one should carefully perceive how everything in this material world is illusory. One should give up the misconceptions of I and mine with regards to the material world. The conditioned soul has maintained this false misconception since time immemorial. That is why the mind is restless, making it appear like a wheel of fire. Now the question may be raised. If one has a vision of duality, how can he realize the absolute truth? The answer is, the absolute truth is one, but he appears to be many. You remember? In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna told Arjuna, you can see me anywhere. In the tree also, in the water also, in the sun also, in the animals also. One in many. The three stages of consciousness are created by the Lord's illusory energy and so are temporary like a dream. So that's why in our Hindu temples, we see so many different forms. One in many. So try to see that one in all of them. The three states of wakefulness, dreaming, and deep sleep, which are born from the three modes of material nature, are actually illusory and are only temporary manifestations. In the philosophy of the Mayavadis, these temporary manifestations are addressed as false. This understanding is false. However, because these manifestations are not false, but temporary. Okay? So there's a difference between something which is temporary and something which is false. Until a living entity appreciates the sublime nature of the eternal spiritual pastimes of supremely conscious person and the minutely conscious person, his heart will remain enraptured by the mundane duality of material enjoyment and attachment. When the remembrance of Krishna's pastimes is awakened in the heart of a living entity, his propensity for enjoyment or renunciation is destroyed, and his propensity for eternal service to the Supreme Lord is awakened. Because when you know that it is temporary, and there is something other than this which is permanent, obviously you want to go towards the higher. Verse number 35. दृष्टिं ततः प्रतिनिवर्त्य निवृत्त तृष्णस्य तूष्णीं भवेन निज सुख अनुभवो निरीह संदृश्यते क्वच यदिदम् अवस्तु बुद्ध्या त्यक्तं ब्रह्मायन न भवेत् स्मृतिर् निपातात. With the understanding of the temporary and illusory nature of the material world, and having pulled one's vision away from illusion, you should remain free from desires, from material enjoyment. So again and again, he is telling us this. We should remain free from desires for material enjoyment. It's not that we got to run away from the objects, but the objects should not be in our mind. They should stay where they belong. Desires. That's what we need to control. By experiencing the happiness of the soul, you should give up material speaking and activities. Even if you must be involved in material activities like eating, you should remember that it's not ultimate reality, that you have renounced it. By constantly living in this way, right up to the point of death, you will not again fall into illusion. So that's why prayers before eating, prayers before sleeping, prayers when we wake up, even when we go out of the house, going into your temple area, surrendering. Before you start the car, remembering God. So use all those moments to connect with God. Even while taking shower, remember God. So doing the things in this material world, mind should be connected with God. The Lord said, because the visible material world is illusory and thus miserable, you should withdraw your vision from it and give up all desires for sense gratifications. You should curtail material activities and talks of material subjects. So that means even talking about it, just we got to gradually reduce it. If you want to reach where he is trying to take us. You should simply take pleasure in the self within, knowing that this will free you from material bondage. Now the question may arise, it is possible for an embodied soul to remain free from dealing with the external world, and so will never become freed from material existence? The answer is, even while performing activities of the material body, such as eating, this will not be the cause of illusion if one has given up the material conception of life. With the help of the intelligence. Therefore, until one gives up his body at the time of death, one should continue to treat material objects with a mood of detachment. One who has attained the human form of life should not utilize material gain for gratifying his senses. There is no need to strive for material happiness, just as there is no point in endeavoring for distress. One should instead try to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead by his execution of devotional service. Bhakti. One who is fully engaged in the devotional service of the Lord can understand that all kinds of material attachment simply increase material illusion. Step by step, one should detach himself from matter by fully attaching himself to the devotional service of the Lord. Let's do one more and then we'll stop it here today. Verse number 36. Deham cha nashvaram avasthitam uthitam va siddho na pashyati yato dhyagmat savarupam daivad apetam ath Dev Vashad Upetam Vaso Yatha Parikritam Madira Madandha. Just as a drunkard does not know whether his clothes have fallen off or if he is still wearing them, a self realized soul does not notice whether his temporary body is seated on an asana, standing, or walking about. It's like a total detachment from the body. In these two verses, the condition of a liberated soul is described. When one has realized Brahma, he does not notice whether he is sitting, standing, or walking. The example is given of an intoxicated person. He is so absorbed in himself by the influence of wine that he hardly notices, even if his clothes fall off or somebody is dressing him. A self realized person has no interest in the enjoyable objects of this material world. Because he is situated in his eternal constitutional position, he sees that his temporary body and restless mind are products of matter, and thus he always remains engaged in the transcendental service of the Supreme Lord. As a drunkard does not care about the state of his clothing, a self realized soul is indifferent to and forgetful of material enjoyment. So we will start with verse number 37 next week. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Visheshyate Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.